Hello, I'm going to walk you through the 6 key quotes from Act 2, Scene 2. So if you want to get that paper out and maybe your book, that would be helpful. So I'm not going to show you where they are. You should be able to find those yourself and highlight them. But I do want to walk through what they're saying, especially since some of these are a little bit tricky. So we'll talk about what they're saying, and I'll talk about how you're supposed to figure that out too, because I know this is a lot harder for some people than others. The first key quote number 1, is from page 69, when Romeo says, "But soft, what light through yonder window breaks? It is the east, and Juliet is the sun." So this is the first part of this. So it's a metaphor. Figure out what is he comparing Juliet to. It's a pretty straightforward one, right? And she's standing probably in her window, thus the first line there. So this is our metaphor. That's pretty straightforward. Then he says, "Arise, fair sun, and kill the envious moon, who is already sick and pale with grief that thou, her maid, art far more fair than she." So Juliet is the sun at first, but then the sun is the maid of the moon. And if we look at page 68, so on the left side, it explains that Diana is the goddess of the moon, okay? So that you, Juliet, as the sun, are the maid of the goddess Diana. And it explains on 68 what Diana is the goddess of, other than the moon. And Romeo says, "Be not her maid." So figure that out. I think we can follow that, because it's not saying don't be the goddess of the moon's maid, but Diana is the goddess of something else, and Romeo doesn't want her to be that thing, so he's saying don't be that thing. I don't want to get more explicit than that. Next quote. So Juliet is standing on the balcony. She doesn't know that Romeo is listening to her. She's not aware of him until where is it? Page 73, like line 56, when she says, "What man art thou?" Like, what man are you? Once Romeo speaks to her. Here, she's talking to herself. And she's expressing her innermost thoughts. It's a soliloquy, which will be one of your vocab terms that I go over in a different video. But she says, "O Romeo, Romeo, wherefore art thou Romeo? Deny thy father and refuse thy name. Or if thou wilt not, be but sworn my love, and I'll no longer be a Capulet." There we go. So one thing you can do to figure out what these people are saying are try to find patterns. So if I try to see, okay, what words are connected? What's the repeated idea here? She's saying, "Why are you Romeo?" This would be why are you Romeo. So why is she saying Romeo's name so many times, right? That's a repeated idea. She says it 3 times in one line. And she has the word name. Refuse your name. Right? What's wrong with the name Romeo? I don't know. And then she says, "If thou wilt not, be but sworn my love, and I'll no longer be a Capulet." That's her name. So we have these repeated ideas of her talking about Romeo's name and her name. So you can figure out, she's not saying, "Why are you named Romeo instead of, like, John? Why are you Romeo instead of Dimitri or whatever?" She's saying, "Why are you Romeo Montague? Like that, why is your name that last name? You should deny your father, right? Your father has the name Montague. He's even called Montague in the text when we read him. And refuse that name, Romeo Montague. Or, if he doesn't want to give up his name," she says, "be but sworn my love, so profess your love to me, and Juliet will gladly give up her name." Right? Because as we figured out from the sonnet that opens this act, the main obstacle between them is simply that she is a Capulet and he is a Montague. It's literally their names. The families are not different. The parents behave the same. The kids behave pretty much the same. barring some individual differences. It's just this stupid idea that because they have different last names, they have to hate each other. They're supposed foes, as the sonnet says. They're supposed to be enemies because of that, even though they don't hate each other. Romeo and Juliet, anyway. So if you look at for the patterns and say, what do we have a bunch of? Well, we have a bunch of her talking about names. So that's probably the key in this particular quote. This next one is kind of an extension of that, right? What's in a name? That which we call a rose by any other word would smell as sweet. So Romeo would, were he not Romeo called, right? We have the repetition of call and called, retain that dear perfection which he owes without that title of Romeo. Right, so if we think, what is she actually saying? Well, clearly she's still talking about names. She says, the thing that we call a rose, the thing we look at, it's a flower, it's a rose. If we called it something else, it would still smell like a rose. You could call it a dandelion. It would still smell like a rose. You could call it a rat. It would still smell like a rose. That wouldn't change what it is inside or the impact that it has, right? So names are pointless. So then she said, so, right, this is an analogy, a connection. Romeo would, were he not Romeo called, retain that dear perfection. Right, Romeo is perfect, like a rose. And it doesn't matter what you call him. You can call him a Montague, you can call him a Capulet, you can call him a Smith. Doesn't matter. He's still going to be the same person. So again, we have this idea that names are meaningless. It's just a label. Right? He's still Romeo, even if he doesn't have the title Montague. He's the same person. So these two are related quotes there. All right. So in the book, she has that little bit, and then Romeo jumps out and says, by a name I don't know how to tell you because you hate my name. And she's like, oh, I recognize your voice. That's Romeo. On page 73, she talks about this place is death, considering who you are. This is around line 70, so you need to leave because my family's going to kill you. This is really like not a safe place for you in particular. And then Juliet has this really long set of speeches on 75 and 77. And you'll notice that Romeo, a lot of his lines will end in like a dash dash. He'll say like one line and it'll be dash, and then it's Juliet. That means this line continues, but she's cutting him off. So that happens a couple of times on page 77. He like goes to promise something to her, and she cuts him off. She starts talking instead. And one of the things she says is, Romeo says, lady, by yonder blessed moon I vow that tips with silver all these fruit treetops. Right, so he's going to promise his love by the moon. And her response is this. Oh, swear not by the moon, the inconstant moon, that monthly changes in her circled orb, lest that thy love prove likewise variable. So let's tackle that part first. What words seem to have similar meanings? Well, I see three. I see inconstant, right? If you're inconstant to someone, you're not faithful, you change. That monthly changes in her circled orb, right? Because the moon throughout the month changes. It's like a half moon, and it's a crescent, and it's a waxing, waning. Sometimes there's a full moon, sometimes there's no moon. So it changes every night throughout the month. And variable, right? If something is a variable, you can change it. So he goes to swear by the moon, and she says, don't swear by that thing, because the moon will change, right? If you swear by the moon, your love might also change. Your love might prove similarly changeable. And she doesn't want that. She wants him to love her forever and not change his mind about being with her, right? Which is valid, because if we've seen how fast he flipped from Rosaline literally this morning to now professing his love for Juliet, I mean, that seems pretty changeable, variable to me, but here we are. So then he says, what shall I swear by? And she says, do not swear at all. Or, if thou wilt, swear by thy gracious self, which is the God of my idolatry, and I'll believe thee. So she doesn't want him to swear his love at all. But, if he does, he should swear by himself. Right? And what is his self? What is Romeo to her? He is the god of her idolatry, right? This whole time he's been calling her the saint, right? He's been putting her far above him, right? Here she's doing the same thing. She's saying, okay, I might be a saint, but you are God, right, to me. So, number one, that's like super against their religion. Like one of the main, what are they called? Commandments. One of the main Christian commandments is like, don't have any other gods before me. And she's saying, you are my God, Romeo, which is like a lot. But also it's showing that she respects him and wants to sort of worship him with her love as much as he does her. So it's a reciprocal sort of relationship. So there we go. I'm going to pause this video and I'll have the other two quotes in the next one because I don't think there'll be enough time in this one. So check out the second video for the last two quotes there.